poll questions that we're going to be posting throughout the presentation. So we will probably try and pause and pick up some of the kind of reflections and comments that you might have around those poll questions. So on which, if you want to open the meeting chat in a bigger window and maximize that, then you'll be able to see the poll questions and the multiple choice answers as we post them. And I say, Matt is hopefully finishing the presentation with a bit of time at the end for some reflections on the main question of the session. Can we use graduate regret as a signal to inform student choice, or graduate contentment as a signal of excellence? So let's get on with it. He probably needs no introduction, but in case you haven't had the pleasure yet, delighted to welcome and introduce our presenter today, Matt Hiely-Rayner, who wears a number of different hats. Matt is the Director of Strategic Planning and Performance at the University of Sussex. He is also co-chair with me of the planning group of the HEIR network and compiler of the Guardian University Guide. So without further ado, Matt, over to you.
Thank you very much, Rachel. It was helpful that you introduced all my different roles there, because I think this work on graduate choice really spans all three. It was through my work for The Guardian that I managed to acquire the data this year, but I only knew about the data because of an earlier session that the HEIR network ran back in, I think it was April or May. So just a bit of background, I think most of you know this, but The Guardian commission the league table from Intelligent Metrics each year with the objective of informing undergraduate choice. So that's particularly for students from backgrounds that don't have experience of UK higher education. So because of those principles, we really focus on the subject level, on teaching, on undergraduate courses, and with some acknowledgement of the different starting points from which students embark on their journey. As Rachel said, I'm also co-chair of the HEIR Network Planning Group, and we're always on the lookout for hot topics. So that's topics that are somewhat novel to the network or are of renewed interest due to policy development. So last year we had sessions on educational gain and AI-driven interpretation of student survey comments. This year, as I mentioned, we had the precursor to this on graduate outcomes, where it was revealed from somebody at JISC that this data is collected. And we also had a really interesting session on UN Sustainable Development Goals and how they can be embedded into institutional objectives. I'm also at the University of Sussex in strategic planning, and throughout my career, I've always had to pay close attention to the policy landscape and how performance measures are used to judge us. So we want to be able to articulate excellence. So that's why I've called this slide graduate choice / regret / contentment. I think it's partly because of my different roles. It's also partly because there isn't a good title for it that already exists. Through Intelligent Metrics, I'm interested in graduate choice because we're all about informing students, prospective student choices. Through HEIR, we're always keen to feed data into our institutional research that can help enhance the student experience and protect students from undesirable outcomes. So avoiding a state of regret is important to that. And then at Sussex, we want to sort of delight our students and have graduates who reflect positively on their time with us, retaining a sense of belonging and feeling enabled to make a difference in the world. So we want them to be expressing their contentment with their choice of studying at Sussex. So that's me, but I should introduce the data as well. This is the part of the questionnaire that spawns all this data. You'll see it's labeled as optional. It's an opt-in question bank, and it was generally understood that universities have to pay if they want these questions to be asked, and then they get the data for them linked to their full data set. Actually, for this bank of questions, the questions are included in the survey for all graduates of English universities. And the extra cost seems to only come in if universities want to access the data. Now, it was quite a circuitous path to even find this out, and I'm not 100% confident in it, but I am 100% confident that the data exists because we've acquired it. So, I mean, there has been some frustration as I've spoken to different people trying to establish who's got this data. And it's a bit annoying that if the question's being asked, that it's not released to institutions as part of their normal subscription to JISC. But it only cost, well, I think it costs per question. So we're looking at between 1,000 and 4,000 to get this data for each institution. And it's valuable. You know, these are students answering these questions with the benefit of hindsight, with early insights into how, to the extent to which their degrees prepared them for their early career steps. So when we discussed this with the Guardian, on the one hand, they were kind of sympathetic to a sector that's very short on cash at the moment, but still somewhat incredulous that we weren't taking this opportunity to essentially understand what our customers think. Because even though response rates, you know, there's a lot of complaints over the falling response rates to the graduate outcome survey, any customer survey that managed to get the hindsight view of between 30 and 50% of customers and their reflections on that product would be seen as extraordinarily valuable in other sectors. So it's kind of something that for me we've got a duty to understand. So anyway, to go into the questions in a bit more detail, you can see them on screen, but it's important to pay attention to the format. It's phrased as, if you were to choose whether or not to do your course again, how likely or unlikely is it that you would do a different subject? You can see the options, but then the options are very likely, likely, and so on. It's important to pause here and be cautious about how we're then going to interpret results, because the most affirmative response of very likely, you know, we almost need to interpret it as the graduate is saying they are racked by regret at their initial decision to take the subject they took, to study at the provider they went to, and so on, and they really strongly wish they'd chosen otherwise. Conversely, we can interpret being very unlikely to take a different decision as a sort of deep sense of contentment with their original selection. At least that's how I'm going to be carrying these results forward for ease of use. So that's the questionnaire that was asked. We are now going to move on to our first poll. So just to draw a sort of boundary around this, we only acquired data for the cohort of graduates in 22-23, and it's already filtered to full-time first degree respondents. The question is only asked of graduates from English HE providers, so there's a whole load of don't know stripped out for both responders from English providers, but also institutions outside of England. So the question, which hopefully is coming up in front of you, I'll check if it is. It is. Which question do you think revealed the most regret? Where, as I said before, well, no, I didn't say before, regret is the proportion who responded very likely or likely to all responses against, except don't know. Start responding now. This is meant to be quite fast paced, so I'm not going to give you a lot of time. Just do something instinctive, and then we'll take a look at the answers in a moment. Okay, I've done mine, and actually I can see that I can actually see your results already. Well done. I don't know how you knew that. I didn't think that was the most obvious of the questions I'm going to ask. There are some later on which are fairly obvious, but yes, the result is do a different subject, and the poll reflects that. 41% of you thought that would be the case, and indeed it is. Um, so it's interesting. Um, I think looking across these different questions, just going to touch on a few of them. There's the question of regret that they didn't work towards a different type of qualification, and there wasn't much interest from you thinking that would be the source of most regret. Actually, I mean, it was a different type of question. We were asking which was the most, and it is not the one with the most regret, but there is substantial regret in response to that. It's the one that I don't really know how to interpret, because it kind of begs the question of what do the students imagine they might have done instead? Are they expressing that they regret the debt levels they've got and they wish they'd done an apprenticeship? Um, or do they wish they'd done something with a placement on board of it? I don't think the question is phrased that way, but it might be what they're thinking of. Um, so, I mean, remember, we're filtered to full-time first degree. This question might be more useful if you were looking across, how that changes as students move to master's level and so on. But anyway, it's quite a source of regret. Um, for policymakers and those with an interest in articulating the value of higher education, I think it's good news for all of us, basically, that less than 20% of this cohort wished they'd done something completely different instead of going to an English university. I think that's really as good, and it's a good overall result for the sector. Um, and sort of works against some of the adverse headlines we've seen in recent years. Um, so this is the first point at which I'd like to pause and just see if anyone has any questions or comments on these levels of regret. I'll move on swiftly if there isn't anyone who would like to ask any questions or ask a comment. Just raise your hand if you want to do so. Okay, not at this stage. I'll pause again after each one of the polls in case there's something particularly surprising or comment worthy. Um, so oh yeah, sorry, we displayed it like this. So of course, when presenting these results through the Guardian University Guide, we flipped it around to express it as a positive. It was hard to come up with the opposite word for regrets. If anyone has any suggestions, please do pop it in the chat. We settled on contentment, or I did. Things like satisfaction kind of crossed over too much with NSS results. But we were particularly interested in the relatively low contentment with the subject choices of students, because we assume, or the guide is designed in such a way that we assume that students come to the guide with a sense of what subjects they want to study, and then we help find out who's providing those subjects, who looks like they're good at it, and then what courses do they offer. So it was quite surprising to us, apparently not surprising to you, that actually this is the source of most regret. So when we launched the guide this year, that was the angle that featured in the editorial. Before I show you the pictures of what we actually published, I'm going to go on to the next poll. So I've only chosen a subset of 6 subjects. Remember, we have 66 in the guide. In your opinion, which of these subjects garnered the most contentment? So I'm talking about contentment here. So it's the proportion that stated they would be unlikely, very unlikely, or neither likely nor unlikely to have chosen a different subject if they could choose again. So hopefully the poll is open. Yes, it is. My selection, but I know the answers. Okay, we're at over 100 results, so get them in now. Thank you. Well, again, you're a well-informed audience. Maybe you read The Guardian when it came out back in September. Yes, indeed, medicine is the subject for which there's most contentment, and maybe that's you know the least obvious, sorry, the most obvious result you're going to see in this presentation. Sorry, I should have moved on my slide. Yeah. But it might still be of interest to those who are trying to avert the BMA's current strike action, previous concern about how junior doctors are treated and their workloads. They're still kind of pleased that they did medicine, so that's of interest. There's surprising news elsewhere, I think. I only really chose the larger subjects for this. Dentistry is actually top of all. And the top 10 is dominated by the kind of health-related professions for which there's a really clear route from the degree course you take into that profession. But there's some real surprises further down. I think general nursing. Oh, I haven't shown the results. Okay, so I showed it in this format. So yeah, general nursing. You can see it's relatively low, you know, levels of contentment at just under 70%, whereas it goes up to sort of 89% for dentistry, 81% for medicine. General nursing does lead to employment, high levels of employment, but there's relatively high regret. On the other hand, computer science has often been a bit of a mystery in higher education in that there's loads and loads of demand for skills, and there's lots and lots of graduates taking it, but the proportion who are moving into graduate level occupation through, you know, either the 6-month horizon or the 15-month horizon has always been surprisingly low for something for an area where there's skill shortages. This is showing that despite that, there's quite a high level of contentment with where students are going. The other one really gets to the heart of one of the reasons I was excited about this data, because one of the frequent complaints we get is that we're not measuring, or we are measuring things that aren't important to prospective students, and actually graduate employment is the most important factor for the students who use our guide. But so the story goes, that's true for some subjects but not all. So for example, art students, you know, it's not always in their plans to be in a managerial, technical or professional occupation 15 months after graduation. They're getting something else from their degree, something that's, you know, currently not really being captured by the metrics we use. So I was expecting to see some sort of happy artists who aren't in that sort of role, but actually the rates are quite low. You can see 65.4% there. Not as low as business and management. It's the largest subject according to the boundaries we use for the guide, and it's the most regretted. So what's the story there? My feeling, and you know, invite comments on this, but I almost see it's quite a generic choice for students who don't have a strong interest in a particular subject. My evidence for this is anecdotal, but when I've worked at institutions that have a heavy presence in clearing, it's one of the subjects where you can still be attracting students sort of a month after A-level results day. It's a sort of sometimes a bit of a default option for someone who wants to study something useful in higher education. It's just opinions, but I kind of feel that this is why we're seeing satisfaction rates that are sub 60%. And this is actually the lowest in the sector. There might be other explanations, but for me, this is one of the key messages from this, because the biggest subject in the sector is the most regretted, and therefore, when trying to inform student choice, I kind of take this message and think, well, how do we go about making sure that students have more visible options when using our guide? As a counterpoint to the self-satisfied medicine students, 81%. So we need to sort of spare a thought for the graduates of biomedical sciences who have one of the highest level of regret. Only 61% were content with that. So I'm guessing the remainder, the other sort of 39% kind of wished that they'd managed to study medicine. And it sounds like I'm joking, but I think actually that dynamic between people having wanted one thing and got another is something we'll see later in some of the other results. So here's what went out in the Guardian. You can see the sort of rankings of the different subjects, so with a focus on healthcare graduates and some of the most regretted subjects down the bottom. I've plotted this out in relation to sort of the average career spot prospects for an entire subject as used in our guide versus the percentage who are positive about their career prospects. You'll notice that I've got the axis the wrong different way around for this slide than for all the others, which is annoying. So the news about art was particularly interesting because I was looking for something that could be used in certain subjects as an alternative to the graduate outcomes metric. But it's important to note that some of the more expected results were observed for other art subjects. So drama and dance up here, for example, or is it there? It's probably there. They're well above the line, meaning that there are many students who don't have an occupation that's regarded as good 15 months after graduation, but they're still pleased they took the subject. Generally, as we said, health professions are really associated with most contentment, but look down here at social work and mental health nursing is very low down as well. These do lead to very high employment rates, but not contentment. So this is the relationship between whether the students regret their subject and employment rates for that subject. The relationship, incidentally, is not shown here, but it's actually weaker if we change the percentage positive to refer to the question about whether students regret entering higher education at all, subject by subject. So on to poll 3. So we're going to look now at provider relationships, so the relationship between responses and providers. And I've given you 3 options here for what sort of relationship you will be observed. So A is there's no overall relationship between institutional ranking in the Guardian University Guide and provider contentment. B is that providers with the highest overall ranking have the highest graduate contentment with their choice of provider. And C, that providers with the most professionally focused portfolios will receive the highest contentment. And again, this is relating to the question where positivity is whether the students say they'd be unlikely, very unlikely, or neither likely nor unlikely to have chosen a different provider if they could choose again. I'm going to make my selection. Okay, I think I sold you guys a bit of a red herring here. Sorry about that. You've gone for C, which does sound obvious given what I've just been saying. Yeah, I led you astray there a bit. Actually, the answer's B, and resoundingly so. There's a huge relationship between overall institutional ranking and contentment with the provider. It's over a 0.6 correlation when looking at this provider by provider, which is different to looking at it department to department. So much so that actually it's the outliers that kind of make it interesting. So here's the overall relationship between institutional ranking going up here and levels of graduate contentment going across here. And actually, you know, I start to look at this relationship and almost see it as problematic for introducing this as a metric in the guide. Some outliers: University of the Arts London and Creative at Goldsmiths is quite artsy, and also University of the Creative Arts. Oh, I didn't mean to do that. University of Creative Arts is one of these two down here. Uh, they're doing much better in the rankings than they do for graduate contentment. Um, but I think the reasoning behind this is that their low graduate prospect rate, because they offer courses in the arts which don't lead to those sorts of roles, they're being standardized at the subject level. So UAL overall might have quite low graduate employment, but it's very good in every subject um, that it offers against quite a low mean. Um, so that's being treated as a relative positive in the rankings and therefore enabling their top 10 position. Um, but separately, we're seeing this low career prospects associate with low contentment, and that's not being accounted for here. Another interesting one is Newcastle. Now, there's a bit of timing issue here. Newcastle had a big fall in the rankings this year, but in previous years it would have been up near the line essentially. So I think there's we're surveying people in 22, 23, and Newcastle's position would have been much higher when those students graduated. Um, I was meant to stop and see if there are any questions after each poll. Um, I'm not seeing any, so I'm going to move on. Do jump in if anything is surprising or comment worthy. Um, so this was all at institutional level. Now, as I've mentioned before, we mainly operate at the subject level in the university guide. So the next slide, which is, I'm not really expecting you to interpret, but this is looking at department level, the total score for the department, which is always out of a maximum score as 100, which is why you see this sort of top limit here, and how that relates to the percentage who are positive about their choice of provider. Um, we see the same positive relationship, but it's not as strong as at the institutional level. And one possibility or one factor that might be mixing things up a bit is that there are many subjects in the Guardian University Guide in which the top 10 isn't the sort of preserve of your top major intensive players, who also tend to have high tariff requirements. There are lots of subjects where institutions from all mission groups can really excel in the metrics that we're using. There are some subjects where you see much less of that, and it's unusual to see sort of non-Russell Group institutions at the very top. So the total correlation here is 0.3, and that's kind of similar to the relationships we see between the other metrics and the overall score, always only filtering to departments that have a complete data set. So for me, the weak correlation here actually presents a bit more of an opportunity to use this metric because it's given me more confidence that we're not just measuring the same thing in a different way. But to be clear on that, we need to look at the correlations metric by metric. And that leads us to the final poll, which is which standardized metric has the clearest relationship with provider contentment. So what I'm looking for here is a sort of clear linear relationship between a positive relationship as well between any one of these metrics and the proportion of students expressing contentment with their choice of provider. I'm using standardized scores for this, so student staff ratio is already inverted. So, a low student staff ratio will be seen if it correlates as a positive correlation with the contentment figure. So I hope it's clear what I'm asking for. I now worry it's not, but what's the closest relationship? Which metric has the closest relationship with the contentment with provider question? Ah, well, there are lots of correct answers. Um, but ah, I am very interested in these results. I'd love it if someone would come on at this point because over half of you have said satisfaction with teaching, and that is quite far off being the correct answer, actually. Um, I'd be intrigued to know why you went with that answer, and we are doing well for time, so do jump in and sort of explain uh, why you thought that would be the case. Um, the the actual correct answer is, as you'd expect, career prospects, because departments that generate students who find positive occupations are simultaneously generating students who are then content with their provider choice because they've ended up in a positive occupation. Now, that's kind of interesting in itself, but it's expected. Um, I think what's less expected for me anyway was the relationship with average entry tariff, which you can see is only a whisker beneath the correlation shown for career prospects. Um, so while
Matt,
it's oh sorry.
sorry, Matt, I was just going to say there's a couple of comments in the
Oh
chat
sure. Let's go to
about
those.
this. Somebody was saying that their thinking behind it was that satisfied students less likely to have regrets.
Yeah, of
And
course. I suppose it is just the next data point where they reflect positively on their experience at the moment it's finishing or in the final year, and then 15 months later. Yes, it does make sense that, and it's a similar instrument as well. Um, so yeah, I can see why that was given as the answer, but yes, it's average entry tariff, which didn't seem intuitive to me as well. It's at the opposite end of the student journey. It's using a completely different um, system of measuring. Um, so I have a bit of concern over this result. For me, it's almost saying that the main consideration going through respondents' minds when reflecting on whether they regret going to the provider they went to is firstly because of the correlation with graduate prospects is am I in a good place now career wise, and it kind of spoils it if they're not doing something they want to do. But then the sort of secondary and the very close secondary consideration is, did I get into the provider that I wanted to get into? Did I get into a provider that was kind of relatively exclusive and I made it? And that sort of self-satisfaction continues with me all the point to 15 months after graduation, where I'm sort of um, you know, deciding whether I wished I'd gone somewhere else or not. That part of the association might be students who didn't get into their first choice university or would have liked to apply for a different university but didn't think that they'd make the conditions. Um, so it is a bit of a problem for using this as a metric in the university guide because to a large extent it's going to sort of put a double emphasis on entry tariffs, but yeah, not in a very helpful way. Um, so um, the next slide really is just showing all those different correlations. So you can see quite a strong one for career prospects, but also for entry tariff. Flicking back to assessment and sorry, for teaching, it was quite a weak relationship, not as weak as assessment and feedback, which often is very counterintuitive. Well, it's not counterintuitive. It goes against the sort of overall hierarchy of the sector, where some of the institutions that are top in so many other ways are relatively weak at providing good assessment and feedback in a timely manner. So we see that lack of correlation across all of the other metrics as well. Um, I wasn't surprised that continuation and value added scores had little correlation, especially given the relationship with average entry tariff, because we already sort of account for different starting points in these metrics by through the indexing process that we take, where we look at the probability of continuing beyond the first year and the probability of getting a first or two one based on entry qualifications. So that the correlation shown between average entry tariff and provider contentment doesn't translate to the continuation value added scores is kind of to be expected.
Matt, there was sorry, just jumping in because there was Andy Blunt's posted something that's quite interesting. Wondering whether you'd looked at that, asking that it'd be interesting to understand the relationship between the graduate reflection questions, whether they're using the skills, doing something meaningful, etc. Was that anything you explored?
Yeah, no, I couldn't, unfortunately, because it really makes sense because when exploring alternative metrics, yeah, that's the obvious go-to place. We hadn't commissioned that data. I know it's publicly available, but we don't have it at Guardian subject group level, whereas we'd commissioned this data at Guardian subject group level. So it was very easy to look at the correlations department by department. What we'd really love to do, of course, is get it at individual student level and then really see the deeper correlations with other outcomes. And that should be possible for institutions to do, to see, if students believe their careers on track. Sorry, that's complete university guide speak. I shouldn't be using that. I meant oh gosh, does your current occupation fit with your future plans? Um, yes, I imagine that students would show more contentment, but against which question, I'm not sure. Um, did another question pop up there? I should have the chat open myself.
Yeah, there's been quite a lot of comments throughout,
Okay,
but
okay, let's work
so
through
should
those.
we, yeah, we could invite colleagues to put their hands up and ask some questions. One thing, Matt, that came up at the beginning of all the chat was that um, some people were posting that the data does seem to be available. It's being used and shared, and somebody, John, I think it was John, posted some top tips for where to find it. So I think the kind of mystery around this availability cost uh, continues.
It's
But
incredible.
yeah,
We searched high and low, both at Sussex and at Brighton, didn't we? When after our last session, when Gussie had told us that it exists, we searched high and low and couldn't find it. Okay, well, thank you for sharing that, because I'd love to be able to look at this data student by student in connection with the 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 other data that we have internally.
we've got a
John,
hand up.
so
Yeah.
yes, John, please come in.
Yes, I wasn't even aware this was asked of our students because we haven't opted into any of the opt-in banks for a number of years, and it wasn't till this invite to this webinar came up that I went, oh, does that exist? And then went off looking for it and found it in our TSV files that we get in the results, which I've always ignored because, as far as I was aware, we didn't ask any opt-in questions.
Okay, well, we know where to look then. Thanks very much for that. John, Robert Ware, do you want to come in?
Yeah, I'm going to raise an issue that Rachel and I have kicked around a fair amount, and that's response rates. So these are optional questions, and having sat and done the graduate outcome survey, I can tell you it's humongous. And if I was doing it, I would want to exit the survey as quickly as possible. So what sort of response rate are you getting on these questions? I mean, I'm from Ulster University in Northern Ireland, so we probably don't get this anyway.
No,
So it's a
no,
bit academic, but out of
it's
interest, if we were to, what sort of figures would be looking at?
yeah, I don't know, first of all. I didn't get response rate data. But we did, because Gosia Turner at JISC was the person that told us about this data at one of our previous sessions. And we did ask the question about response rates. Most of her presentation was about response rates, in fact, and how they're falling for a number of surveys. She did say that the sort of drop off within survey for those people who complete the early part but then exit with a partial completion, I think she said it's less than a 7% drop from start to finish, but I don't have any further figures than that.
Okay. Well, I would just say that we had a meeting yesterday, and we were all for the ICAS group, and we were all just looking at the response rates going south. There was some communication from Gosha, and she was basically saying, well, it's a top priority for us, but what are we going to do? Well, we'll carry on emailing, and we'll have some teamwork, and that was it. So, given that these are optional, so your response is going to be less even then, I suspect you're probably dealing with fairly small cohorts, but fair enough.
Thanks, Rob. I think, I'm not see. I think the confusion around these, whether these are actually optional for the English universities, is under question on these ones. Somebody, Nicholas, has just said in the chat that looking at their files now, and it looks like these questions are slightly lower, but you might, if they were optional, you might expect a perhaps larger drop off.
To be honest with you,
to be found out, I think.
To be honest with you, Rachel, I think there's an awful lot in the graduate voice that is really, really important for Go, because the only metric we get out of it is percentage HSE, really. And actually finding out whether a graduate thought their degree was worthwhile is actually really important, because the whole raft of subjects, and art subjects are probably a classic one, where you might not get a high percentage HSE, but you might be really, really content. The other thing we see is, like, we run courses in hospitality, tourism, and management, and they typically get a SOC code of 5. Now, you can have a graduate earning 35,000, 5 members of staff reporting to him and running a bar, but ONS says it's not a graduate level job, but he might be really happy with his career outcome. So I mean, more of this graduate voice stuff would be very, very useful. So, but see how you go.
Thanks. I mean, that's the reason I was so excited about it. As I said, it's the sort of the criticism that the highly skilled employment isn't capturing everything that's valuable about where higher education leaves a person. That's why I was quite surprised by some of the results, but it does bear delving further into. LT next. Louise.
Hello, thank you very much. So I work as the person at the University of Reading that looks after the Graduate Outcome Survey. One of the things that I just wanted to flag is that this data has been in the survey and available for at least the past 4 or 5 years, so since the 2018-19 stuff. So we've been able to get a really good kind of year-on-year kind of look at this data, which has been really, really interesting. In terms of the question about response rates to it, it's actually like someone said in the comments, it's actually not that dissimilar to the overall survey. I don't think the students or graduates, when they're being shown the survey, get told that it's optional. I think we obviously get told that it's optional as a provider, but it's been required, essentially. Someone else has paid for it for institutions, which is why we get it, which was actually quite a nice little benefit that we found when we were looking at whether or not to opt in. We were like, wonderful, we don't have to pay for that, but we'll still get the data. So I do recommend everybody having a look, because it is really, really interesting.
Thank you. Yeah. And now we know where to look for it.
Yes.
Stella Ray, I hope I said your name correctly.
Yeah, that's fine, thank you. So I'm Stella Ray from Swansea University in South Wales. So that was my question about whether we know if Wales will have access to data like this at some point. At the moment, we haven't got access, or our students aren't asked these questions.
No, that's right. It sounds like it was national policy, secret national policy to make this, and I do wonder, presumably it was the Office for Students that made it mandatory for England.
Yes.
What are they looking at it, and how are they judging us? What happens if that sort of over 80% contentment with going into higher education at all starts slipping towards 70%, 60%? You know, does that is someone monitoring this and sort of balancing it against other factors? So I don't know. Maybe it's just as well that it's not being looked at in Wales if that's how it's going to be used.
I think that's a really interesting point though, Matt. You know, should we ask the question of the OFS of what they do with it? Do they remember they asked for it? Maybe.
Maybe
know.
they're using it behind the scenes to sort of, you know, justify the expenditure on higher education. It does, that 80% figure does run counter to quite a lot of the sort of media attention that higher education's had in recent years about, you know, not being worth it, not being of sufficient value. So it's quite a powerful figure. Thank you all for participating in that. I mean, I suppose the question I haven't really answered. I am coming towards some answers over how we use this in the university guide. So I mean, there are practical barriers to using it as a metric in the rankings because of its lack of coverage for institutions outside of England, which of course we include in our guide. I had seen as I've mentioned, I had seen it as a potential alternative to the career prospects metric that is highly skilled employment essentially for particular subjects where the focus is less on an occupation and more about the broader benefit that a student sort of feels from their degree and how that might come through as a sense of contentment. It might serve that purpose, but then I feel the relationship with entry tariff is problematic. I think where the big potential for the Guardian University Guide is to use this to help students with their study choices. If we can show students the subjects that are more likely to result in them feeling they wish they'd studied something else or not gone into higher education, then I'd envisage that being available for every subject, not just the ranking where we show the top 10 and top and bottom 10, but also almost a profile for every subject. And in some cases, like business and management, I'd hope that we'd be encouraging students to think a bit more deeply about the options available to them and where their interests lie. But what I haven't really answered or come to any conclusion on is what about utility in the teaching excellence framework? If you're lucky enough to be at a provider where students are really content that they made the right choice to come to you, they don't regret entering higher education at all, and so on. Can you be using that as a signal of excellence beyond the other outcomes that are already covered in the graduate outcome survey? And so yeah, I don't know. It's got potential as something that comes up in the TEF, especially that the consultation for the teaching excellence framework is already talking about a sort of move away from the over dependence on the progression metric, as they call it, which essentially, yes, it's highly skilled employment. So yeah, I welcome any thoughts on whether this would suit those purposes.
Matt, perhaps whilst people are just thinking about response to that, I know you've already touched on it, but there's quite a few more comments and likes to these comments coming up in the chat about potential metric in the guide or in the rankings, I should say, and then concerns about if it's not available for Scotland, Wales, etc. Maybe you just want to kind of clarify your kind of final thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean the lack of coverage would be a problem, and there's no, you know, thought was given back before we even had the data saying almost, well, you know, the non-English providers do still have the overall satisfaction question from the NSS, and the rest has this sort of hindsight reflection from 15 months later. Could they be used in conjunction? But I think everyone can, it was me that sort of voiced it, but I knew that wasn't going to be a good enough solution, and there's absolutely no support for doing so. So yeah, I don't see how it can be a metric that's baked into the actual rankings contributing to overall score. I do see value as a supplementary ranking that would have reduced coverage, much as we did. We do have the provider by provider information. But as I ended on at the end there, I think it's really the two most valuable things for me are informing subject choice, where most of our focus is on provider choice, but doing more about subject choice, and the sector being able to show its collective value through students reflecting so positively on their decision to enter higher education.
Great, thanks, Matt. So, wondering, yes, if anyone's got any thoughts, reflections about the point that Matt was asking about use in excellence. I think there's some comments about the graduate voice questions in graduate outcome survey, which of course one of those, the one about utilizing skills, is included in the OFS consultation on future test metrics. Seems to be some support for the chat keeps moving. Meaningful activity is meaningful might be interesting. Does anyone want to come in and share some thoughts or ideas on that? Louise, thank you.
Hello. Yeah, it's one of those, the meaningful activity is meaningful question is one that we actually are looking at internally, with this idea that graduates might not be in graduate level work or study, but actually is that because the subject that they're in, the work and the employment that they're led to actually isn't graduate level study, but it's what they want to do. So actually, is it the right thing for them, regardless of whether the OFS or we as an institution class it as graduate level? That's kind of where we're starting to think on it as well. And obviously, we're aware that the OFS is now looking at whether the skills, using the skills. I personally don't think that's quite as useful, but that is not my decision for the OFS, basically.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I mean, what are people's thoughts on, of the three questions that are asked universally? I can't remember what the title for those three is, but what would be most useful for a subject in which a graduate occupation isn't the primary objective of those three? Because there's on track and using skills. Sorry, no, future plans. I can't remember what the third one is.
Skills are meaningful.
Meaningful. Okay. Well, was it I could not get this? I could not have done my job without my qualification, or was that in the old survey? I can't remember. Sorry, I'm exposing my ignorance. Next question. Fenwick.
Scott.
Statistician from 1994.
That's indeed correct. Yes, I remember. Right. Thinking back to the old NSS, when there were 5 responses, we used to do a bit of analysis at Northumbria on the impact of indifference. So,
Okay.
how like a positive was the top 2, and the negative was the bottom 3, and we're trying to sort of like look at those who just slap straight in the middle.
Yeah.
So my thought is, what would you be thinking about that with regard to the middle choice for regret against contentment?
Yeah, I regarded it as contentment for this, but it could go either way. I think one of the slides I showed the split subject by subject. I'll just go back to it. No. This one, yeah. So you can see it's for these subjects, but I imagine this is true for the general distribution. this middle category isn't all that big. People tended to have a view one way or the other. So
yeah, that's a good example. Thank you.
just okay. Well, we're almost at time. I hope that was useful. If nothing else, I think we've provided a platform here where we've all shared that some of us know where to find this data and others didn't even know it existed. So I think that's a pretty good achievement, and well done the HEIR network for enabling this conversation to happen. Rachel, thank you for comparing with an E. And, yeah, any final words,
Great.
Rachel?
I don't think so. There's oh, hang on, we've got a last minute hand gone up. And I can't see your name. John. No, maybe that was a missed click. I think you're getting lots of round of applause and thumbs up. So thank you very much, Matt, for sharing this with us. It's been a really good, interesting session, and so yeah, I think we've all definitely learned something and lots more food for thought. Thank you all for joining us, spending your Friday lunchtime with us, and for the engagement and comments. It's been great to hear from so many of you, and I've really enjoyed it. If you want to know more, get in touch with the network, connect with us on LinkedIn, and thank you all so much. See you at the next one, and hopefully in Dundee at the University of Abertay in September 26. On that note, we'll call it a day. Thank you very much.